thank you so much for joining. Welcome to That's Not What I Said, Assessing Quality Assurance in Translation Work. My name is Una Hartzell-Baird. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Translation at Luna Language Services. Now, I'm sure that some of you have had this same experience that I have in terms of being nervous and trying to figure out exactly how to assess quality. So I'm really excited to share this topic with you today. As we're doing the presentation, you'll see that my video and our ASL interpreter, Anna, are pinned. Please feel free to make any adjustments within your own Zooms to serve you the best way possible. And as we go on, feel free to put any of your questions in the chat and I will address questions at the end of the webinar. So I remember really distinctly being so excited about coming into my role as Director of Translation, but also oscillating between this excitement and complete terror. Working in over 200 different languages with people all over the world and for a variety of industries, the first thought in my head was, how do I make sure things don't go wrong? How do I make sure that the quality is there that our clients need? And of course, the next immediate thought was, if I could only do this and do it all myself, right? Speak over 200 languages to native proficiency, be able to handle all of these projects, then I could have control. And outside of the fact that this is hubris at its best, right? Because we're all human and we all make mistakes. I also realized I just don't have the time to do this. And some of you may be in that position as well, where you do have a native proficiency in more than one language and you could do this work, but there's just not necessarily the time in your day to do all of it. So at Luna, when we talk about quality assurance, we're looking at three key pillars. And these include our networks, processes, and our tools. So when we discuss our networks, what I mean is not only the folks that we work with in-house in terms of our translators, but also freelancers and an exclusive list of other agencies that serve niche areas or only specific languages and work with companies like ours. And in these networks, this gives us an opportunity to constantly be working on and creating qualification requirements. As part of this, both the industry standards and the ISO standards 9001 and 17100 come into play. So for those of you who are perhaps not familiar with ISO, it is the International Organization for Standardization. And what this international organization does is it provides standards, some of them more general, like the 9001, and some of them more industry specific, like the 17100, which is specific to translation. And these standards are internationally recognized and externally audited for certification for each of the organizations that holds them. So the 17100 standard specifically provides qualification standards for the translators, as well as translation processes that should be followed. So within our networks, when we are assessing that qualification, we're looking for native proficiency in the target language, near native or native proficiency in the source language, as well as looking at a combination of years of experience and education. So 17100 standard tells us that if a translator has a college degree specifically in translation, they have met the minimum requirement for beginning translation work under that standard. Have 2 years of full-time equivalent translation experience. And if they don't hold a college degree, then they must have 5 years of full-time experience under their belt. In addition to these years of experience in education, translators have to demonstrate cultural competence, understanding language within the context of the culture that they are working with. And finally, they also have to be able to do research. Researchability is a large component of what they're doing daily because of the terminology needing to be quite so specific in many of the industries that we work with. And when we're looking at these qualifications, how do we assess them? Well, Luna, as well as our partners, work on a system of first looking at those resumes, right? So we look for what are the years of experience? What types of projects has this translator completed in the past? What is the education that they are them on the test or on the CV? We also ask for work samples. And this is where we have the ability to evaluate the source and the target files where someone has already completed a project, and we can use this as part of our tool set for evaluating the quality of their work. We, of course, ask for references, as you would with any type of hire that you're making, whether it's freelance or staff. And here we're looking at their past experiences in relations to the project managers that they've had, other translators that they've worked with, and even direct clients that they have partnered with. It's also common to provide tests, and these tests not only look at the accuracy of the translations that they're providing, but they also assess the speed at which they work, because being efficient in the work is another important aspect to delivering quality translations. And then finally, also their ability to communicate with project managers. At times when we design tests, there will be specific things that are either omitted or are intentionally vague, which should trigger a translator to reach out and ask for clarification. Now, the final aspect of assessing all of these qualifications is ongoing feedback. And this again comes back to not just the teams that they work with, but the project managers and the clients, because a key aspect to being highly qualified is continuing to professionally develop and grow in your field. And these same folks that we work with, you may be able to work with as well. And you may already have worked with some of them. There are industry-specific websites like proz.com, where you can connect with freelance translators as well as agencies. And there are, of course, more general freelance websites like Upwork and Fiverr. But you may find yourself with either a lack of time or ability to do these assessments. And that's where network and resources can help to support that quality and insulate our clients from quality assurance issues, such as hiring a translator who is actually taken someone else's resume and does not intend to provide the quality that they're being asked for, or working with other agencies that perhaps are constantly asking for free tests from translators while never providing them the opportunities to continue working fully as a way to save on costs and create a larger profit margin. Now, as someone who routinely finds that, I have misspelled something in either an email that I've sent or a paper or a blog that I've written, I'm sure you can also relate to this. It's pretty common to go back to a piece of writing and notice that you've made a mistake. And as with each time being convinced that this time I spelled it correctly, I really did, I can fully understand and value the importance of an editor in the process of translation. Now, that being said, quality processes start long before the translation ever begins. So our team of project managers begins this by assessing a scope of work and putting together an agreement for our clients. Here, we're looking at your source files and figuring out what is the most effective and efficient way to create this project for you. We define the requirements. Will we need to do formatting at the end, or do you only want us to provide a bilingual table with the translation? And likewise, establishing and agreeing upon timelines. Once our clients have approved a scope of work and an estimate, then we proceed to the assignment phase. And here we match translators, human, highly qualified professional translators. Not only are the translators professionals in their field, but they also often carry subject matter expertise that helps them to complete the projects with higher quality. Once those assignments have been made, the process of translation, editing, and proofreading begins. And this is where ISO again plays an important role. So within the 17100 standard, we outline requirements for translation and editing. And proofreading is there as a best practice and as a suggested practice, but is not mandatory to obtaining or maintaining a ISO 17100 standard certification. At Luna, we do go ahead and implement this piece of the process to, again, raise the bar on that quality assurance. And when it comes to this work, no matter the size of the project, it could be 100,000 words or a 10-word sentence, we're always following the same process to work on the initial translation and a second to do the editing. The proofreading phase is completed typically by the initial translator once they've received those edits and either approve them or further discuss any changes with the editor. When it comes to delivering the project before final delivery is made, this is where our quality checks really shine. And we'll talk about the tools more in depth coming up. But when it comes to the tools that we use, they're set up in such ways to support those small mistakes like minor spelling errors or punctuation, as well as larger ones like mistranslation or a lack of consistency across word choice. In addition to using a variety of digital tools to support quality control, we also love utilizing client feedback. And here, some of our clients will create internal review teams so that they can provide feedback very specific to like you do. And so having internal reviewers that can provide linguistic feedback and let us know exactly what their preferences are for the language allows us to feed our tools and our systems and keep that consistency across the board. What happens in these instances is over the lifetime of working with a client, there is less and less internal review that has to be done because all of those suggestions are taken into account for future projects and future iterations. A final aspect of the translation process that is sometimes used most frequently in research or clinical trial settings is the back translation. With back translation, what we are doing is, for example, we're taking an English consent form and we are translating it into Spanish using this translation, editing, and proofreading process. Then that finalized Spanish translation, and they complete translation, editing, and proofreading back into English. What this provides is an overall assessment of whether the accuracy was maintained between that original English document and the Spanish. And it provides insight into the tone and the feel of the document as well. What it will not be is it will not be an exact replica of that source file in English, because so often there are many different ways to say something in other languages as there are in English. And so if you've ever, had a friend who calls soda pop or a friend who calls pop soda, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. So the intent and the content will be the same in terms of the understanding, but not necessarily identical in terms of word choice. And when to err is human and to use technology divine. And while technology never fails to fail us, it's certainly helpful in a lot of different ways. When I can get my coffee order just a little bit faster because of the mobile app, or a heart patient can very quickly and effectively send their pacemaker information to their cardiologist through the comfort of their own home, it's undeniable that technology and the digital tools that we use can create a lot of conveniences and improve quality of life. And when it comes to translation tools, our toolbox begins with the project management system. So at Luna, we use Plunet, which was specifically designed for the translation industry. And what Plunet does is it allows us to manage the life cycle of a project. And it also provides full access to our clients for that life cycle. So everything from submitting an initial request to receiving security. Because we require two-factor authentication, And we also require that passwords be changed every 90 days. This tool allows for improvements in cybersecurity. And because you can submit your projects directly through the secure portal, then that decreases the likelihood that private information or confidential information will be intercepted or shared, as is sometimes the problem with sharing information via email. In addition to helping to manage the life cycle, because of the data points we collect on all of the projects, this is also a really data-rich inventory for our clients to use and create relevant searches. And the data that you can pull from this system about your usage can help to support grant writing efforts, applications for federal programs, or even just justifying a continuation of your language access budget by showing to non-English speaking communities through the work that you do with translation. Another aspect in our toolbox are the computer-aided translation tools, or CAT tools. And here we're talking about things like MemSource, Trados, MemoQ. These might be some names that you're familiar with if you've worked in translation or localization before. But if they're new to you, CAT tools are not the same as machine translation. So when we're looking at machine translation, that is using artificial intelligence that's been trained on language to do the work of human translators. It can work well in some instances, but depending on the language and the nature of the content, it often requires extensive post-editing. When it comes to CAT tools, these are tools that we use to leverage projects being able to be worked across multiple teams simultaneously. We also use past projects, provided glossaries or term bases that give us instruction or reference in terms of the really specific language that they want to use, then these can also be used here to ensure accuracy and consistency in the language selected. These tools help to increase efficiency and output, and they improve security since many of them can be accessed by translators, excuse me, through a web portal, while also limiting their ability to locally download content. So anything that may be confidential or private can stay that way. And finally, while all of our CAT tools also include some QA checks, there are specific quality assurance, quality check tools that are out on the market and used in the translation industry. And these tools include Xbench, Verifica, and QA Distiller, to name a few. And these work hand in hand with the CAT tools, with those translation memories, with they help with spell check and punctuation as well. And they can provide reporting that we provide to either our clients or to our translators and editors as a form of feedback for their own professional development and improvement. Now, feedback is probably one of the most low-tech tools in our toolbox. And this can be such a critical piece to really taking your translation to the next level from, oh, this is a good translation, to this doesn't sound like it was translated. And an excellent example of this for us has been the work that we've done with Project Lead the Way. And if you're not familiar with them, Project Lead the Way is a nationally recognized organization that creates STEM curriculum for schools to use across the US. And when they realized that they had a need for Spanish translation of their curriculum for pre-K through 8th grade, they partnered with Luna review team of teachers who were already working in bilingual settings, and some of them had already started to create these translations on their own. And I remember distinctly one time as we were walking through a section that we had translated and their feedback, the teachers had a 20-minute conversation about whether they should use one word for tire in Spanish or another. And their students would be more familiar with one, but the other would challenge their growth in their Spanish vocabulary. And so it was so interesting to see that. And when we received that feedback, we could add it to our CAT tools, to our translation memory, and be able to effectively continue that accuracy and consistency across all of the projects. Now, when you're looking at all of this, whether you are working on an internal localization team, hiring your own translators, working with freelancers or agencies like Luna, these are a few questions. Correct? Well, let's find out about those qualifications. How qualified are the people that are doing the work? Ask about the processes. Do they hold certification like ISO 17100? Are they using translation, editing, and proofreading, or are they only providing translation? Are they using human translators, or is their work based in machine translation? And ask about the tools that they use as well. Are they using CAT tools to leverage that terminology and past translations? Are they using QA tools? What does this process look like for them when it comes to the tools that they use? And how do they request and process feedback as well? Now, as someone who has a 5-year-old, I have daily reminders of how little I can control in my life. But as you can see at Luna, we put a lot of effort into quality assurance and making sure that whether in Word project, quality assurance really starts with those human connections that we've made and the standardized processes we've implemented, and ending and wrapping up with those digital tools that we use in order to make sure all of it runs as smoothly as possible. Now, I will be happy to take a look at the questions that we have with the time we have remaining. So let's see. And feel free adding, yes.
Una, we didn't have a ton of questions in the chat. We did have a lot of fabulous people saying hello and introducing.
Wonderful.
I do have a question that I think would be great to talk about. There's a lot of folks on this call who may have team members that they know speak some other language, but they're not quite sure how to utilize that or how to assess their proficiency. So if I'm a team member and I'm trying to figure out if one of my team members can be a reviewer or can possibly do some translation work for us, how would I assess that language proficiency?
That is such a fabulous question. So there are certainly many different tools out there that you can use in terms of actually doing language assessments. We partner with a couple of different organizations, and we have actually performed language assessments in terms of translation specifically for a couple of our partnering clients. And as part of that, you know, to be bilingual is not necessarily the same as being able to provide effective feedback or serve as a translator or interpreter. And so we can certainly help with assessments like that. And there are a number of other organizations and tools on the web that can help with that as well. But an even bigger question when it comes to using internal reviewers is also provide effective feedback, and will they be able to keep the project on track with that? We have had times where we had to adjust final deadlines because, of course, the internal reviewers also have regular day-to-day duties that they are assigned. And so sometimes a project may take longer because of that internal review process, which doesn't mean it's not valuable. It just means we have to adjust our expectations for the project.
So Roger has his hand raised. Roger, would you like to come off of mute to ask your question?
Thank you very much. I'm not so concerned in a sense about the accuracy of translation, but about whether the translation is able to get across the mood of the original. Mm-hmm. I was particularly interested a little while ago in looking at translation from different translations of the same thing, and whereas they both agreed on what had been said, the mood was quite different. I saw a translation of Shakespeare from Shakespearean English into modern English, and the whole idea of the original was lost. And I'm wondering what you can do about that.
Yes, and that is one of the biggest things that I think professional translators discuss is what is that word choice you select, and how do you combine that intent and the tone and the meaning that may be lost, whether it's across time or across cultures. And this is where really the translators specializing in this kind of work tend to shine. And when it comes to the folks that we work with, if we're working on a very specific project like this, right, it's not your standard flyer announcing the company holiday party. This is where we really have to go with folks who have a background, not just do the professional work in translating, but really have a background in the subject matter that they're addressing. So certainly for Shakespearean works, that would be something where you need someone who has experience, who perhaps has a literary degree as their background, in addition to being a professional translator. And so much of it is having these types of discussions in translation forums and helping each other improve our work as well.
It's interesting, really, to me, because I was a couple of weeks ago, or maybe more than that, I was engaged in a seminar, on a webinar actually, which was talking about Sophocles, the Greek tragedies, and the person who was giving the lecture had obviously only read it, well, not obviously, but he had only read it in English. And I was really wondering whether whether the idea of Sophocles had been adequately translated. The story was right, but was the what was the cultural and so forth right? And I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm only just raising it as an issue because I don't really know what the answer is. I'm not really expecting you to answer either, but I'm just admiring the ability. And it's very important in modern translations. I was listening to a translation of the United Nations simultaneous translation, and considering how very important it is to understand the meaning behind the words of a foreign diplomat. Or we could easily get involved in disasters in Ukraine and elsewhere. Anyway, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your thought-provoking question.
So Una, we have another question from L. Gomez in the chat. They ask, do you offer trainings for translators?
Excellent question. So currently we work with a pretty small pool of freelancers, and then we provide most of our work with that small pool of freelancers as well as our staff. But I would be more than happy if you send me an email. I will be more than happy to send some references and resources your way in terms of options for further trainings.
Una, I'll place your email in the chat. For anyone who's watching the recording later, the email will be in the description of the video as well. We've got one more question. This was sent to me directly. She asked, I'm just curious about the speaker's perspective. What is the most difficult language to learn if one is a native English speaker? I'm multilingual, but have struggled with Mandarin and Arabic recently.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that is another one that certainly is really my own perspective, right? Not necessarily. I would say that it depends on your skills and talents for language, right? So some folks might struggle with languages that are tonal, like Chinese, and others might struggle with languages that have a writing system that isn't what they're used to, like Chinese and Arabic, and particularly Arabic because it's written left to right rather than, right to left rather than left to right. As someone who has personally struggled with understanding which part of my body is left and right most of my life, that is certainly one that would be difficult for me. But I think oftentimes the languages that are most difficult to learn are the ones that we don't have the ability to practice often. So if you are learning a language that you have a community you can connect to, that you have folks you can practice with, that's going to be, that practice is the key to retaining that information and feeling really comfortable using that language. So I also see in the chat that Edith had a question. Is it true when it comes to Indigenous dialects, often written translation is pointless because the target population doesn't read the language? If so, how do we ensure quality for these types of languages when interpretation is normally used? That's a really great question. And really for that, we have to be asking the end consumers for those languages. I think it's unfair to assume that they don't always speak it, although I understand where that comes from, because absolutely, especially Indigenous populations often don't have the ability to access education in the same ways that we would consider necessary. And so if they're not able to read those written languages, then there are different things you can do in terms of recording messages in their native and providing more visual representations of what's necessary. So for example, I know we've all seen this when it comes to COVID, lots of restroom signs with signage that not only spells out how you should wash your hands, but shows you the process, right? Of getting the water, getting the soap, washing your hands, and drying your hands and following these processes. So, so these are a few of the ways that we can try to equalize the playing field and provide that information, even if someone is not necessarily able to read the language that they speak. Okay.
You know, there was one more question in the chat, and then I know we're just over our time, so we'll wrap up with that. The question from Stephen is, how is quality assurance different with written translations versus live translations?
So talking about written translation versus interpreting, and interpreting can be a little bit tricky. And I feel like we have a whole different webinar we can set up with that line of quality assurance. So when it comes to interpreting, it is a little bit trickier to assess quality. But some of the things that we do is we actually have a quality assurance manager who will pop into different interpreting situations to be able to assess all of the quality standards that we have around interpreting. Likewise, anytime phone interpreting is done, there are recordings created to not only manage quality assurance, but to provide training to translators as they go on. And with that, likewise, video interpreting can be done in the same way, where there are recordings created and then reviewed. And in particular, if there's ever a question about quality within an interaction. Okay. Well, thank you all so much for such fantastic questions. Certainly, I know that Tiff is going to share the slides with everyone and our contact information. I would love for you to reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn or send me an email. Again, that's una@luna360.com. I appreciate your time and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Very interesting.
Thank you.